Good morning to you. You. Good morning. Good morning to you. And many more. And many more. And many more. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues Black Table Talk Edition. We are now officially in season 17. Last week we ended season 16, and we are now in season 17 after our mini break, and I am excited. We have moved our Black Table Talk. Our section for Black Table Talk is now going to be here on Mondays. We'll be broadcasting on Mondays, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Um, but also throughout the week, we will be still broadcasting on YouTube. So this is a read aloud and discussion podcast that covers various topics. So if you're with us for the first time, you're starting off season 17 with us, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are continuing reading from several books that we have been reading from the past couple of seasons because we are just taking our time. We're taking our time and we're learning and we're discussing and we're enjoying what it is that we're learning. So Mondays on Black Table Talk is going to be called the Melanated Mic because we are talking about all things Black. If you're looking for our inspiration, we will start out with a little bit of inspiration before we get into our reading. But for Tuesday and Thursdays, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we will be starting at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 a.m. I'll say it again. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. So our talk back time today is going to be on our Facebook page. You can meet us over there for the talk back if you want to join me, if you want to discuss what we have read aloud today. All right. So let's hop into it. I hope you all are having a Wednesday so far. And as I said, we are now in the Melanated Mic. We're going to be reading from two books today. The first one is Meditations for Black Women. I've really been enjoying taking my time and walking through this particular book. I think that all of the, but I find that the um, messages that she has in here for the most part can apply to anyone. And so let's go to the next reading. Doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo. Mm-mm-mm. All right, here we go. Today's reading is Accept Life's Mistakes. I have come across a few people in my life that cannot accept mistakes. They cannot accept that they make mistakes, and they cannot accept people who make mistakes, which makes for a difficult relationship when you are connected to someone like that. But the topic today is accept life's mistakes. Marva Collins, educator, said this: if you can't make a mistake, you can't make anything. Meditation or prompt to think about today. Mistakes are lessons that redirect me to a better path. Reflection. Are you high functioning or anxious? Check in. Does perfectionism have a hold on you? Then you need to embrace the power of making mistakes. Don't turn the channel. Don't turn the page. You need this reflection. Trying to be perfect is your anxiety part of you bossing its way through your mind, through your body, and through your soul. To you, practicing perfectionism is how you protect your emotions from unexpected circumstances. But really, all you're doing is reinforcing the idea in yourself that you lack self trust. You don't trust yourself to be able to handle the uncomfortable emotions that come with the unknown. And because most Black women are high achievers, making a mistake is not something you are comfortable with. And even culturally, we have been taught that we have very little room for mistakes. So you embrace trying to do everything perfectly, when really you need to learn to accept that you will make mistakes in life. And it is okay. Additionally, the world does not like to give us second chances. So we often feel the pressure to get everything right the first time. It's a lot of pressure to put on a person. However, now it's time to let go of that way of thinking. Lean into making mistakes as a way for you to reclaim your power. The best part about embracing a mistake is that it opens the door for you to radically accept yourself and find your own inner peace. You will learn that mistakes do not define you. The way you recover from the mistake does. After all, they are lessons that can redirect you to a better or a different path. Now, I don't know about you. Maybe some of you have never hit rock bottom in your life. You've never been at a place of complete and utter devastation. Maybe you've never been to a point where you can't figure out where the next anything is going to come from. I have been there. I have felt and experienced what it means to hit rock bottom, to not have a job, to not have a home, to not know where your next meal is going to come from. And it is a devastating feeling. But here I am, 14 years later, and I can tell you that if you keep going, on the other side of rock bottom is an opportunity. On the other side of rock bottom is the hope. On the other side of rock bottom is recovery. On the other side of rock bottom is some of the highest heights and the deepest depths you will ever experience in life. And what that time of my life taught me is that, unfortunately, sometimes because you're in the valley of the situation or because you're in the pit of the situation, you stop looking for hope. You stop looking upward and you begin to focus on the pit, or you begin to focus on what you see just right in front of you. And so sometimes when I hear people say, oh, hope is not really, it's not a big deal. It actually is a big deal when you are at the end of your rope, when you are in a pit and the only thing you can see is the pit that you were dropped in. When you are in the valley of your situation, you can't see a mountain peak. You don't know that there's a mountain further on up because you're so deep in the valley. You don't even recognize that there are mountains ahead. Um, and so I want to encourage people to understand that there is a power in hope. Hope can power you when you cannot yet see further than the next few steps in front of you. And like I said, I've been in that place where I haven't had food, I haven't had shelter, I almost didn't have clothing, um, had my car taken, no home, none of these things. And like I said, here I am 14 years later, and I'm in a much different place. But I think about how many people just saw what was in front of them and they lost all hope. And I think about that every now and then. I think about the people that did not make it to the other side of their future because they lost hope. They couldn't see beyond what was directly in front of them, because what was directly in front of them looked devastating. It looked, for some people, career ending, right? It looked life changing in the most horrible way. But I held on to my hope. I held on to my hope. And I held on to um, my mantra that this is temporary. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep walking, and I'm going to put one foot in front of me, and I'm going to try every day. Didn't That does not mean that I didn't want to give up every day. Let's be clear. That does not mean that I was like not saying, you know, if I go to sleep tonight and, I wake up in another plane of existence, I'll be okay with that. I had those thoughts. I did. That it's okay. I need another day of this horrific experience that I'm in. But when I opened my eyes and saw another day, I said, if I'm here, if I'm being given another day, it's another day for me to do something different. It's another day for me to keep going. If I'm here another day, there must be something in the day that I must get done. And so that's what I did. I learned to just put one foot in front of the other and take small steps every single day. Now, was there people, and we're talking today about accepting life's mistakes before we go into our main reading. Was there people that made this process absolutely harder than it had to be? Woo! It's where I get my next mantra from, which is humans are going to human. So yes, were there human beings that made my little itty bitty steps one in front of the other much harder than it had to be? Absolutely. Those humans are no longer a part of my life. That was the lesson I learned. When you get to the other side, make sure you leave them on the other side. And then there were also humans that said, I see you, I hear you, I know that you're in a space where life feels like it is beating you down, where life feels like it has got you by the throat and it's just slinging you back and forth. You know, I don't know who's listening today. Maybe life doesn't have you by the throat. Maybe life has you by the bubble bath. Okay. But at that point in my life, life had me by the throat and it was just slinging me back and forth. And there were people in that space who said, I see you. Maybe I can't solve all of your problems, but I'm not going to add to them. Oh my, oh my goodness. If I could leave anything with you today, if you see somebody struggling, don't add to the struggle, please. Don't make their life harder than it already is. If you can't lift a burden, if you can't lift a burden, don't add one. Am I making sense? If you can't lift the burden, don't add one. Okay? If you can't lift the burden, don't add one. Right now, I got 18 people for the month of November who I hope to at least lift a little bit of burden for them, because I don't intend to add one. And so I think this is a great message for today. Accept life's mistakes. Accept life's fumbles. My husband and I were sitting across from each other last night, and we were having dinner, and we were looking down at our hands, and we noticed, like, okay, in another week or so, I think I need to, get my manicure done again, because my cuticles are looking a little on the raggedy side, right? And so I was thinking about, okay, I need some oil, I need some lotion, I can probably clean it up a little bit um, before I go back. But then I said to myself, what's so interesting about the fact that we're talking about this simple, minute thing? It's the fact that we're human. We're human. Humans have things on us that need maintenance, right? I'm going today to a dental appointment. Humans have things on us that need maintenance. That's a part of what makes us human. I'm not an AI bot. I'm going to have raggedy cuticles that need something done to them. And we just started laughing about that because sometimes we're trying to be so put together that we're forgetting that there are aspects of us that make us who we are. There are aspects of us that make us human. The fact that you have to pluck your eyebrows because they get out of joint. The fact that I have to draw mine in because I don't have any makes me human. And good morning, Pax. Good morning. It makes me human. And so some things we just need to step back a moment sometimes and just appreciate that we're human, that there's things on us that are going to grow, that need repairing, that need trimming, that need maintenance, that need whatever. It reminds us that we're human and we're not machines. All right? So if you came to my page or you joined my page thinking that I was an AI bot, because there now are AI bot pages with figures that talk to you as if they are human. They have millions of followers, by the way, because people can't tell the difference. They don't know that they're not human. But if you came here today, I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes. Um, I'm not perfect. I don't purport to be perfect. I don't purport to be a person who knows it all. But I do want to know more. And I do want to grow. And that's why I do these readings. Not just to get on here with you all, but I read so I myself can learn and grow. And we can discuss. All right? So, last thing here, it says take action. Think about the lessons that past mistakes have taught you and write them down. And Pax put up a great one for me today. If you can't lift a burden, don't add one. That's a lesson I learned by people adding burdens to me when I was already burdened down. Here's another one. If you see a person down, don't kick them while they're down. Yeah. When I was in my pit place, I got kicked a lot of times and I was like, do these people not realize I'm already down? Like I'm already down on the ground. No need for the kicking. No need. Okay? But again, I learned my lesson and I said, and when I get up, and when I get up, I'll make sure I'm not connected to the kinds of people that would kick somebody when they're down. Now, the interesting thing about it is a lot of the people that did the kicking down, here we are 14 years later, and they're no longer here in this plane of life. And I mean, I can't say that I'm mourning that, but it is what it is. All right, I want to clear something up real quick before we go into our reading. Last month was Hoodoo Heritage Month. And I keep seeing several posts either saying that hoodoo is voodoo, which it is not. They're two different practices. Or I keep hearing people say that hoodoo um, came out of um, hiding from the colonizer, or that hoodoo came out of um, the enslavers' religion. And that's actually not true. I'm going to give you two books that you can look into to actually read up on how hoodoo came to be in the United States. One of them is An African History of Africa. I believe in great resource and great research in African history of Africa and the great kingdoms of Africa. I just picked this one up, but I picked up my own copy. The Great Kingdoms of Africa. Both of these books detail the Congo Kingdom or the Kingdom of Congo. Those who were a part of the Kingdom of Congo had what we would call a pre colonial Christianity. They were already practicing Christianity. And guess what? They were still sold away. So those people came to the Americas through enslavement, but they were already practicing Christianity. They had willingly converted, and that makes a difference. It does. They were not forced into Christianity. They had already converted, but they were still captured and sold off into enslavement. Those people who already had an understanding are the ones who go on to create hoodoo, because they were already taking their African spiritual practices and merging them with the Christianity they had. Okay, so they were. So, I know a lot of people keep thinking that most Black Americans in the United States just accepted Christianity by force, but there are several different pockets where Africans were already practicing Christianity, and then they get drug over here to the United States. And of course, yes, they are confronted with the colonizer Christianity, but because these people already knew better, okay, they already knew better, they basically said, okay, we understand what you're saying, but this is what we practice. And so what they did practice in secret. That's where we get the hush harbors from and things of that nature. But I want to clarify that they were, in fact, already practicing Christianity by choice. Okay? All right. All right. And again, I'm going to hold these sources up so you can go look them up. The Great Kingdoms of Africa, which covers a lot of the kingdoms, but it does specifically cover the Congo Kingdom. They even had their own symbols. They had their own kind of cross, their own cosmology when it came to Christianity. And then this one also covers the Kingdom of Congo. Okay? And it's called Congo Christianity with a K. Congo Christianity. Okay? All right. Now let's get into reading from Michael Harriot's book, Black AF History. And this is the chapter called The Church Fight That Started Slavery. The church fight that started slavery. Now, Michael is going back to how does Catholicism play into, and how does Catholicism get into the enslavement trade, right? So let's look at what happens. Prince Henry the Navigator. In 1441, Henry sent two knights, Nuno Tristallo and Anteo Goncalves, off in their late model Portuguese ships to explore Africa and see what they could find. While filling his boat with seal pelts, Goncalves ran across a naked African and his Berber female servant, the first native Africans Goncalves had encountered in his 20 years of exploration. So, of course, he kidnapped them. When Goncalves met up with Tristallo's boat, the two decided to see if Tristallo's African servant, who just happened to be with them, could interpret the unclothed black prisoner's language and tell them where the gold was. Because remember, these people were always looking for gold. And what are people still looking for? Gold. Gas, oil, land, diamonds, gold. Okay? The captured African basically told his kidnappers that he wouldn't be driving a camel if he knew where to find gold. He pointed the knights toward a nearby fishing camp, and the sailors took 10 Africans this time, including the chief, figuring one of them had to know where to find some gold. So they're just going around just kidnapping people. Okay? Which, if you know anything about the Old Testament, man stealing is a crime. The next day, the brilliant but bloodthirsty white knights used the naked captives to lure the African savages into the open. Goncalves and Trastallo were shocked to find themselves ambushed by 150 Africans who opened a can of African whooptail on the Portuguese warriors. Trastallo ran back to his ship and kept sailing south to search for gold. But Goncalves was shook. He decided to head back to Portugal with his seal skins and his 10 captives. By the time Trastallo returned to Portugal, Goncalves had already sold the sealskins and was prepared to split the profits from the expedition with Trastallo. Trastallo was astonished at his share of the take, wondering who his partner had bamboozled into paying such an exorbitant amount for the shipload of monk seals. But the bulk of the money had not come from the seals, Goncalves explained. Most of the duo's profits came from the human cargo. So when it became profitable to sell people as cargo, things shifted. In 1442, when Henry sent Goncalves on another expedition, Goncalves brought the African chief along, figuring he could ransom the chief back to the Africans. Sure enough, in exchange for the African abductee, Goncalves received a big stash of ostrich eggs, a small amount of gold dust, and an oxhide shield. Finally, an African negotiator brought out 100 men, women, and children in a parade and allowed Goncalves to choose any 10 in exchange for the chief. The next year, Trastallo returned, but this time, instead of ransoming or kidnapping his human cargo, he bartered for 14 of the village's captives and resold them in Portugal. In 1444, the Portuguese discovered it was easier to barter for their human cargo than capture them. And with that started an entire new economy, one of stealing human souls. Nuno Tristallo and Anteo Goncalves can go down in history as the first Europeans to purchase Africans from black slave traders and resell them in Europe. When Henry heard about the sale, he was no longer interested in the ostrich eggs, the seal pelts, or even the spices. He wanted to know more about this people trading thing. But Henry hadn't cleared this practice with the church and didn't know what the Pope would think. Sure, they had enslaved Moors, Jews, and non Christians during the Crusades, but that was a military thing, a prisoner of war thing, not a pure cash grab. When explaining his rationale to the church, Prince Henry would argue that technically he wasn't a quote unquote enslaver, because true Christians would never do that. Instead, he allowed Portuguese quote unquote missionaries to save quote unquote Africans by converting them to Christianity. The argument worked. By 1446, more than 30 Portuguese ships had filed applications with Prince Henry for people stealing licenses. Listen, people stealing licenses. In 1455, Pope Nicholas V granted Henry a monopoly on the African human market. Here's the clincher though, as long as they baptized their cargo. Henry had finally found gold in Africa, and it was the people. Portugal's only problem was that it was a hassle to sail to Africa, snatch up some humans, travel back past Portugal, and try to sell the stolen Africans in Western Europe. Plus, there wasn't really a big demand for African labor in Europe because the market was flooded already with Moorish indentured servants and the remnants of feudalism. But with the age of empire building came the need for labor. Explorers could discover lands, quote unquote, discover, and soldiers could conquer kingdoms. But if Henry could commodify the labor necessary to build and maintain these empires, he would control a commodity more precious than any mineral or any spice. So after a year, Goncalves brought the Africans back to Portugal. Henry set up the Casa de Guinea. This state-run commercial entity would essentially become the prince's version of Amazon, a one-stop shop for goods imported from Africa, especially the Africans themselves. For the next 50 years, the Casa de Guinea would import around 1,000 Africans per year to sell to willing slave makers around the world. Portugal continued to rule the seas for years after Henry the Navigator's death, sparking a less than friendly rivalry with its Spanish neighbors and earning the undivided attention of all of Europe. Businessmen and ambitious explorers from around the world found themselves in Portugal trying to make a living on Portuguese ships that benefited from his charting of the oceans. Because of this exploration and colonization, the Portuguese Empire eventually stretched from Europe to Japan, covering South America, Africa, and the Caribbean. Despite the African continent offering every natural resource in the world, because Portugal led the way in human trafficking, African bodies became the key to European expansion in the New World. And let no one convince you that it was not important. They'll try to convince you now that it didn't make a difference, that black bodies were not important. But it became the key to European expansion in the New World. And perhaps no one is more responsible for the 400-year competitive empire building race than Henry the Navigator, whose advancement in exploration and charting the world's sailing routes made Portugal the first modern European empire. Okay, maybe there was one guy. While Portugal was filling up the church's coffers in the lucrative spice trade and African resources raiding market, Spain struggled financially. It tried to emulate Portugal's success on the seas, but Portugal always seemed to beat it to the rich African ports. The two countries had even gone to war for a while, a war that ended with Portugal pulling a brilliant move. On September 4th, 1479, after the two countries had fought for 5 years over which royal family should run the Iberian Peninsula and own the African coast, Portugal had to admit that Spain had won and ceded their rule on part of the peninsula to Queen Isabella and her husband Ferdinand. In exchange, the defeated Portuguese rulers asked the Spanish for just one thing. Portugal only wanted exclusive ownership of everything they discovered on the high seas. Spain could have the rest. The Spanish quickly signed the deal and laughed all the way to the bank as Portugal hung its head, stifling its own chuckles. Isabella, Spain's new queen, felt empowered and protected by the Arterni Regis, the church ratified deal that gave and made Spain's royalty the quote unquote eternal ruler of the peninsula, except for the relatively small sliver of Portuguese land. She didn't care about those tiny boat driving Portuguese idiots. They were probably going to get devoured by monsters anyway. And all Portuguese managed to get in return for this deal was everything else in the world. According to the treaty that was ratified by the church, Portugal now owned the entirety of the Great Sea Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and everything in it, all the way to India. All of Africa now belonged to Portugal as long as they could get past the sea dragons. This also meant that Portugal owned all of, well, in 1479, nothing else existed in the Atlantic Ocean besides Europe and Africa. Of course, was that weird guy who kept coming around talking and sailing about west to India. That guy was crazy. This strange guy wasn't wealthy, smart, or talented, but he had started working on Portuguese ships at the age of 10. Even though he was Italian and had absolutely everything the Portuguese seafarers taught him, he considered himself to be Portuguese at heart because he was obsessed with Henry the Navigator, who was already dead by this point, and eventually married a noblewoman from Portugal. The guy had been telling anyone who would listen that he could find a path to India by sailing west, away from Africa, which was unheard of. The nascent navigator drew up a few rudimentary maps, charted a course, and applied to King John II of Portugal's court for a sponsorship to explore 3 times. But Johnny Jr. repeatedly told the passionate ocean pioneer that his maps were wrong. King Henry VII of England also said no. Desperate, the obsessed sailor headed to Spain, where he ran into a fellow Italian who had just moved and was working as a banker. The banker was a smooth talking geography nerd. He told the sailor that his maps were wrong, but as the banker and sailor became friends, they discovered that they had the same obsession. Eventually, the banker revealed that he wasn't just a banker. He was in Spain working for one of the wealthiest families in Europe, the Medicis. The banker made a deal. If the sailor could get someone to buy ships for the voyage, he would get his bosses to finance everything else. But where would the explorer get ships? Luckily, there was one person willing to bet on a strange sailor off the world, not the word of a geography nerd. Spain's new queen, Isabella. Isabella was still steaming over the fact that her rivals now owned the entire ocean and everything in it. She doubted that the weird sailor guy could sail west to India, but it would solve all of Spain's problems if he could. Portugal had just discovered a long path to India by sailing around Africa, which meant the Spanish crown's days were numbered if Portugal controlled Africa and India. Isabella desperately needed a way to even the playing field, and the only thing that could do that was more territory. It was a long shot, but even if the guy didn't find a western path to India, what was worse that could happen? Besides, the underwater Godzillas, that is. So Isabella wrote a check for a factory refurbished ship and 2 pre-owned caravels and made it out to one sailor, one Christopher Columbus. On August 3rd, 1492, Columbus set sail for India. He first spotted land in the modern day Bahamas and explored Cuba before wrecking one of his ships on the coast of modern day Haiti. During his initial voyage, Columbus noted that the quote unquote Indians were so primitive that he could conquer the whole of them with 50 men, the rule of the land as he was pleased. Columbus knew that Isabella hated slavery, but since her army had already captured much of the Iberian Peninsula, she had soldiers to spare. These conquistadors would have no problem dominating these island people, Columbus figured. When he returned, he pulled into a rest stop in Portugal and discovered that he just happened to park his boat right next to King Johnny Jr.'s vessel. Knowing that everything in the Atlantic Ocean belonged to Portugal, the sailor intentionally kept the news of his discovery from the king. By the time the information wafted through the Iberian Peninsula, Junior had already filed a claim, arguing that the newly discovered land between belonged to Portugal. His skilled cartographers had charted a course to this place that no one had ever seen, and as it turns out, their maps were accurate. Both sides of this argument went to the Pope to settle the dispute. Junior argued that this place they called the West Indies was not actually in India, and since papal decrees were essentially the word of God, since the islands were in the Atlantic Ocean, the land legally belonged to Portugal. On the other hand, Isabella argued that God's representatives didn't even know about these islands when those treaties were made. Therefore, the Columbus territories belonged to Spain. To settle the controversy between his churchgoers, on May 4th, 1493, Pope Alexander VI drew an arbitrary line on a map. He declared that everything west of the line, including the islands discovered by Columbus, belonged to Spain. Since Portugal already owned Africa, the papacy decided that east of the line still belonged to Portugal. The only problem with this deal was that there wasn't anything east of the imaginary line besides Africa. A year later, the Treaty of Tordesillas officially sealed the decision. Isabella had essentially used Portugal's old tricks to win ownership of the West Indies. Spain quickly dispatched of its army conquistadors to ravage the Caribbean islands of gold, spices, and natural resources, which helped them gain favor with the church. However, Portugal only had a small population and a meager land army with which it could colonize its expanding empire. But of course, it owned Africa, and Henry the Navigator had created a literal corporate infrastructure for buying and selling Africans. We're going to stop there today, but that is the church fight that started enslavement. All right. I do not see my regular chop it up partner on here today. So I am going to close for today. If you want to continue reading with us, I highly recommend that you check out this book, Black AF History, The Unwhitewashed Story of America by Michael Harriot, and read along with us on Mondays. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, Melanated Mic. I want to thank you for your time and for your attention. Again, for the rest of the week, we are on YouTube. You can join us there, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. When this broadcast ends, I believe on Facebook, it should give you our subscribe information for YouTube. So you can hit the subscribe over there as well. And join us tomorrow. We'll be reading some different books. All right. So if you enjoy reading, you enjoy read alouds and discussion, this is the podcast for you. Take care, be well, and most importantly, be light.